Start. So yesterday we discussed all the way up to class 2 drugs. Now yesterday I discussed about beta blockers in detail because beta blockers will be a class that is recurrent in several other cardiovascular diseases and cardiovascular drugs as such. Okay, the ones that you have to particularly remember for class 2B, even though they are beta blockers, there are 4 specific beta blockers that are used. Those class 2 antiarrhythmics will include propranolol, metoprolol, atenolol, and esmolol. Okay, in arrhythmia, these 4 are specifically used. I explained beta blockers in general so that you know later on the next topic that you'll have, that is of antihypertensives, that will include beta blockers. So will angina, the following topic after that. Okay, these 4 are specifically used in arrhythmia. Now coming to class 3 drugs, class 3 antiarrhythmic drugs. Now there is one specific drug that comes, the prototype kind of drug. There are more drugs. So the drugs that will be included in this will be amiodarone. We'll be discussing about amiodarone in a little bit more detail. We have sotalol. Sotalol being a beta blocker, it is used in this class 3, okay, rather than class 2. Sotalol or dofetilide. Then we have ibutilide and dronedarone. Okay, amiodarone and dronedarone are similar in structure and similar in function. Dronedarone is slightly better than amiodarone because it avoids certain adverse effects that occurs from amiodarone. Okay, even though dronedarone has its own set of problems, it's slightly better than amiodarone in some cases. Okay, now coming to the specific drug that we'll be discussing, amiodarone. So amiodarone has several mechanisms of actions. Okay, it will work in several ways. So just highlight them here. The first and primary or the foremost function that it will do is it will block potassium channels. What happens if we block potassium channels? The result will be it prolongs yeah, Urmila, I'm not able to hear you clearly if you're trying to. Yeah, it prolongs action potentials, and it is specifically action potential duration in atrial and ventricular muscles. Okay, it will prolong action potential duration in atrial and ventricular muscles, basically decreasing the conduction in those muscles and letting it rest a little bit. Okay, that is the primary function of amiodarone. Secondary functions, so other than that, it will also block sodium and calcium channels. Blocks sodium and calcium channels. Okay, as it is blocking sodium and calcium channels, the result will be that refractory period will be prolonged. Okay, you already know what is refractory period once you go into depolarization. So basically aapka, let's suppose this is the baseline and from here depolarization is occurring, slight dip, plateau, then repolarization is occurring, then again slight refractory period will come. If you talk with respect to action potential of a what do you call excitatory cell, wherein you have a normal action potential like this, okay, so this will be the refractory period where you know it is in hyperpolarization and from here it is going into a repolarization. Okay, यहाँ पर you have depolarization, ठीक है, I'll put it as D. यहाँ पर repolarization, this is hyperpolarization. Okay, this is refractory period, the period in which you will not have any action potentials being fired despite the number of stimulations. That is refractory period. So by opening or by blocking sodium and calcium channels, what happens is you will make sure that the drug or you'll make sure that the heart is in refractory period for a long period of time. The result is that it will take longer for the next action potential to come. So basically you're slowing down action potential in a different way. यहाँ पर by keeping it in refractory period is a specific area in which or a specific phase of your excitatory cell in which your cell will not get excited in any way, meaning no matter how many action potentials you give here or no matter how many uh, vertical threshold potentials you give here. Now normally in action potential you need to accumulate enough threshold potential for it to reach a baseline. After that you get action potential, right? यहाँ पर refractory period is the period that comes before threshold potential. If you are able to prolong refractory period, it basically means that you are prolonging the duration in which your cell will remain dormant or it will not get excited. Okay? That is the purpose of blocking sodium and calcium channels. I hope you understood that. Basically, you are making sure that it is not getting excited. Okay, just write it down here. By blocking sodium and calcium channels, the result will be prolongs refractory period. Okay, that is the second function. Now coming to the third function. Third function will be blockage of beta receptors, specifically non-selective. Okay, non-selective beta blockage meaning beta 1, beta 2, beta 3, all of them are blocked. Okay, this is advantageous and disadvantageous both. Advantage is that your SA node gets depressed. If SA node gets depressed, you will not have any more stimulation to your heart. This is kind of good in case of arrhythmia, but it will be bad because this can immediately lead to bradyarrhythmias and it can lead to cardiac failure, or it can also cause or and it can cause effects in your GIT and it can cause effects in your lung. Now whenever I have beta 2 blockage, the person might have precipitation of asthma attack or they might not be able to breathe properly. Third thing, in your GIT you will start having GIT disturbances. Okay, so all of those are effects of amiodarone. Even though it is not a very strong beta blocker, it is it does have considerable amount of non-selective beta blockage. So this is the mechanism of action of amiodarone, three specific functions. The result will be that once you give amiodarone to a patient, primarily their vascular smooth muscle will relax. If vascular smooth muscle is relaxing, blood flow to myocardium increases. ठीक है, arrhythmia में एक problem क्या है? Because it is beating so fast, you do not have enough amount of blood reaching even your myocardium, right, to your coronaries and ultimately to your myocardium. You do not have enough blood. There's simply not enough amount of blood being ejected into your aorta, meaning very less amount of blood will come to your coronaries, right? In this case, giving amiodarone will cause relaxation of vascular smooth muscle, because of which the size of your blood vessels will increase and it will allow more blood to come in. Okay. Other than that, vasodilation in peripheral vasculature, in the peripheral blood vessels, will decrease preload. If preload decreases, the total workload on your heart or the pressure on your heart will significantly decrease. If preload is very high, preload is the amount of pressure your heart has to, or specifically your ventricles have to overcome to fill completely. If preload decreases, it will be easier for your heart to fill up completely or for your ventricles to fill completely. Arrhythmias may, because rhythm is so erratic, preload also eventually becomes very high. Giving amiodarone will help in that aspect as well. Okay, so those are the effects of your amiodarone. I'll just write them down here. Relaxes vascular smooth muscle, causing improvement in blood flow to myocardium. Okay, the whole heart tissue in general, not just myocardium. And it vasodilation of peripheral blood vessels, I'm just writing as BV, causes decrease in preload Decrease in preload. If preload decreases, the eventual effect will be that myocardial workload decreases. Okay, the total amount of work that your myocardium has to do to overcome that preload will decrease, meaning the demand of the myocardium for blood will also decrease, and there is a lesser chance for your myocardium and your heart muscles to get damaged as such. Okay, so it has cardioprotective effects in a way. Now, coming to PK of this drug, one very important aspect about amiodarone is that its onset of action is very, very slow. Okay? Sometimes it will take 2 to 3 days to show any effect, sometimes a few weeks altogether. The same way, duration of action will be very long and T half will be very, very long. So, very good potential for, very high potential for toxicity. So, onset of action is slow. Okay, it might take 2 to 3 days, or it might take a few weeks. Okay. Similarly, duration of action and half-life both are prolonged. This can be from weeks to months. Okay, the drug can stay around in your body for a very, very long period of time. Another thing is that this fellow is metabolized by microsomal enzymes. Metabolized by microsomal enzymes. What happens if it is metabolized by microsomal enzyme? Any drug that you are giving which is dependent on microsomal enzymes for metabolism, it will invariably get affected if you give another drug that is either a inducer or a inhibitor. Let's suppose you're giving something like phenytoin, or you're giving something like phenobarbital. You know it will affect microsomal enzymes by inhibiting them. In that sense, metabolism of amiodarone will get severely depleted, meaning amiodarone will stay in your body for more long, okay, for longer period than you are estimating. So avoid giving them with drugs that have effect on microsomal enzymes, either inducers or your inhibitors. And the excretion, primary excretion is bile. Okay, it will have biliary excretion. Coming to adverse effects of amiodarone, your adverse effects will include bluish gray discoloration of skin, bluish gray skin discoloration. Okay, the patient will have hepatotoxicity, toxicity. Okay, other than that, in some patients, in almost 10% of the patients, they will become photosensitive. Photosensitivity meaning if you give the drug and the patient moves out into the light, okay, they are roaming around in the light outside, their skin will become very sensitive and they'll have rashes and such reactions. Okay, they'll become photosensitive. It will be very painful for them to move out in sunlight, only in 10% of patients. So 10% of patients become photosensitive. It will have nausea. It can cause hepatitis. Okay. Other than that, it has a effect of cardiac failure. It can cause cardiac failure as well as QT prolongation. Okay, QT wave prolongation on your ECG. It can also sometimes called hypertension, especially if you are giving IV. It can cause hypertension when given IV. Another important adverse effect of this amiodarone is that it can cause neuropathy, specifically peripheral neuropathy. Peripheral neuropathy अगर हुई, so what will happen is the patient will lose sensation in their peripheries, specifically in their fingers, in their toes, in their limbs. Okay, that is peripheral neuropathy. If the neurons that are present in your peripheral organs, that is in your fingers and limbs and all of that, the patient will become insensitive to pain and to what do you call, touch, basically, to any types of sensation in that sense. So that is one of the symptoms that you can, if you have a patient who is having peripheral neuropathy, should immediately stop the drug. Okay, switch the drug to some other one. Okay, it can also cause pulmonary hypertension, especially in pulmonary fibrosis. In high doses, at high doses, it can cause pulmonary fibrosis. Okay, this can be life threatening, can be fatal. Stop immediately if you are if you're seeing the patient showing any signs of pulmonary fibrosis. Pulmonary fibrosis हुआ जब the patient will not be able to breathe properly, they will start coughing blood sometimes, hemoptysis will occur, things like that. Okay, uh, other than that, amiodarone will interfere with normal thyroid function because amiodarone blocks peripheral conversion of T4 to T3. Now, you know, in thyroid hormones that are present in your blood, the main circulating type of hormone in your blood is T4, but the usable kind is T3. Okay, thyroxine is the usable kind, whereas T4 is the circulating type. Now, whenever a cell needs thyroid hormone for whatever function it is performing, T4 will be converted into T3. Amiodarone is a drug that will inhibit this. Okay, so it can cause hypothyroidism. On the flip side, amiodarone also has iodine in its structure, meaning it can cause hyperthyroidism. So both hypo and hypothyroidism can be caused because of amiodarone. Depending on the susceptibility of the drug, in some patients you will see hypothyroidism, in some patients you will see hyperthyroidism. In either way, uh, the patient's thyroid profile will get changed. Okay, and in some patients, corneal microdeposits might be seen. Corneal microdeposits. Okay, and disturbance of thyroid function. Okay, it can cause either hyperthyroidism because amiodarone has iodine in its structure, and hypothyroidism because it will block conversion of T4 to T3. Okay, so that is about amiodarone. Class 4 drugs are CCBs. We've already discussed CCBs, so I'll not go into detail about that. Class 4 antiarrhythmics are basically two drugs, verapamil and diltiazem. Okay, we've already discussed calcium channel blockers in congestive heart failure, so I'll not be discussing this. These are specifically used for supraventricular tachycardia. Okay, very helpful in supraventricular tachycardia, especially something called paroxysmal supraventricular tachycardia. It is called PSVT. ठीक है, paroxysmal supraventricular tachycardia. इसका मतलब है you do not know the cause of supraventricular tachycardia. It is abnormal. ठीक है, it is occurring oddly. So that is paroxysmal supraventricular tachycardia. With this, we have completed antiarrhythmics. I hope you understood. If you want me to repeat any part, please let me know. Either today's class or the previous class, then we'll move into antihypertensives if you have any doubts. No? You put it in the chat as well. Okay. So now coming to antihypertensives. Obviously, antihypertensives are drugs that are used to manage hypertension. Hypertension is not a condition that you can treat as such. Okay, it is a condition that you manage. It is like diabetes. Once a person has been what do you call, diagnosed with hypertension, more often than not, they will not go back to normal. Okay, they'll be more susceptible to their blood pressure increasing higher and higher as the age goes. So let's suppose someone has been diagnosed with hypertension at the age of 35 or 40. Okay, normally it should be around 45 50 where it is coming, but nowadays with the current lifestyle it has come down. Okay, sometimes you also find people who have hypertension at 30 because of several reasons: stress, unhealthy lifestyle, sedentary lifestyle. There are several factors. Okay, lack of proper physical this thing movement and physical endurance. So this has decreased significantly. Now what you see in this is, let's suppose someone at 35 has been diagnosed with hypertension and they are at 140 by 90. Okay? Stage 1 hypertension. I'll explain you the stages of hypertension as well. And they started taking precautions. And see, generally speaking, if someone has developed hypertension and they have a sedentary lifestyle and they are overweight and things like that, generally decreasing their body weight by at least 5 kilos and having a more active lifestyle, that can significantly decrease your hypertension. So people who have pre-hypertension, in the sense that people who are between 120 by 80 to people who are between this and 139 by 90, ठीक है, और 80 लेट्स सपोज, ठीक है, ये दोनों के बीच में अगर ब्लड प्रेशर है तो जस्ट लाइफस्टाइल मॉडिफिकेशन करके यू कैन ब्रिंग देम डाउन. ओके, यू डू नॉट नीड टू यूज ड्रग्स इन सच केसेस. यू ओनली स्टार्ट यूजिंग ड्रग्स वंस द पेशेंट गोज इनटू स्टेज 1 हाइपरटेंशन. ठीक है, at this point of time, if you are able to get a more active lifestyle, if you are able to correct your diet and things like that, quit smoking or at least avoid smoking and alcohol, things like that, then this will significantly decrease to an extent that it is told it will almost come back to normal. But the thing is that the patient will become susceptible to hypertension, in the sense that it will be easier for them to develop hypertension later on in their life compared to an individual who did not have hypertension till the age of 40. Okay, let's suppose there is an individual who did not have hypertension till the age of 40 or 50. Okay, for example, there is a man who did not have hypertension till the age of 50, and from 50 they have started taking care of their body. Let's suppose they are taking drugs and they are monitoring their diet and all of that, versus a patient who has hypertension, who has been diagnosed with hypertension at 35. Even if they, excuse me, even if they start taking precautions at 35 and 40 and they bring their blood pressure down, there is a higher chance that by the time they reach 50, their blood pressure will increase more, even with all the vertical precautions they are taking, because their body has become more susceptible to hypertension. Okay, that is why I told hypertension is not exactly a condition that you can treat as such. It is a condition that you manage. All right. At one point of time, the patient will definitely have to continuously take antihypertensives every day, or else their blood pressure will increase. Especially, you will have some patients who have stress-induced hypertension to such an extent that normally they do not take antihypertensive drugs, but whenever they are under quite a lot of stress, they'll have to take a drug. Things like that is also possible, especially in younger individuals who tend to work in a very stressful environment, things like that. Okay. Now coming to, I hope you understood this part. Now coming to classification of blood pressure, show you one image, hold on. See, so this is how blood pressure is classified. Now if you can see here, normal range for blood pressure will be between 90 systolic, on the y-axis you have systolic and the x-axis you have diastolic blood pressure. 90 to 120 versus or over 60 to 80, that is the normal range. Anything below 90 and below 60, 90 by 60 basically will come under low blood pressure, hypotension. Okay, that is a different problem altogether. We will not deal with that for now. But anything over 120 by 80 will be classified as hypertension. Now hypertension also has different stages. As I told you, 120 to 139, okay, or 140, here they have represented here 140, but 120 to 139 versus 80 to 90, that is the stage of pre-hypertension. Okay, the patient is likely to develop hypertension in this stage. Okay, if they are not able to take precautions or if they are not able to change their lifestyle, generally that will translate into the patient developing hypertension, stage 1 hypertension. That falls from 140 by 90 to 160 by 100. Okay, over time what will happen is, if they are still not able to control their diet, or let's suppose if they are having some other comorbidity, for example generally nephropathies, problems in their kidneys, that is one of the most common causes of hypertension. So if someone has had hypertension and they later on in their life develop a type of nephropathy, any type of nephropathy where their kidneys are getting damaged, ultimately what will happen is, even if they are able to control their blood pressure and keep themselves in stage 1 hypertension, as their kidney damage progresses, ultimately what will happen is the patient will go into stage 2 hypertension. It will happen. Okay, especially in patients with chronic kidney disease, it is generally found that they are either stage 1 hypertension, late stages of stage 1 hypertension, where they are like higher levels of 150 by higher level of 90, to they can be in stage 2 hypertension where it is above 160 by 100. Okay, so those are categorizations of blood pressure. Now anything over 190 by 120 will be called malignant hypertension or hypertensive crisis. Okay, at that point there is significant damage to their organs, and the patient will more often than not die if they are not treated immediately. Okay, it is a medical emergency kind of condition where the patient immediately needs to get their blood pressure decreased, or else there will be severe consequences. There is a very strong chance that they will have a cardiovascular accident, basically a stroke. Or stroke is a neurological condition. Okay, uh, they can have a stroke, or they will have myocardial infarction. There are other several organs can get damaged. Okay, how you basically how you assign a normal value is that 90 to 120 or 60 to 80 के बीच में the patient has normal and healthy functioning of their body. Anything over that is abnormal. Now the degree to which it is going up will change depending on the abnormality. So the higher it is, the more damage it will cause to your blood vessels, to your organs, and as such to your body. Okay, so I hope you understood what is hypertension. Now for a prolonged period of time, if a patient is having hypertension, they will have blood vessel, brain, and kidney damage, which can translate into stroke, or it can cause development of coronary artery disease, or it can cause renal failure. So hypertension, development of hypertension can cause renal failure, or it can cause coronary artery disease. On the flip side, if someone starts off with a coronary artery disease or with renal failure, they can develop hypertension. Okay, so it is a vicious cycle. I hope you understood the brief explanation of hypertension. If you have doubts, please let me know. No? Okay. Then we'll start off with antihypertensive drugs. Now, several drugs that we have already discussed earlier will come into this class. So, when we talk about classification of antihypertensives, we have five major classes. Okay, so the first class will be diuretics. Okay, we've already discussed that, so I'm not going to discuss this again. The specific diuretics that you use for hypertension will be thiazides. Okay, see, the translation is that why we use diuretics, whenever blood volume is high, blood pressure tends to be high. So the approach with diuretics is that if you're able to decrease blood volume, you will eventually tend to decrease blood pressure. But this generally only works either in late stages of prehypertension or in stage 1 hypertension, not in stage 2. Diuretics do not exactly translate very well, or they will not have as significant effect in severe hypertension, basically in stage 2 hypertension. Okay, they are more towards drug that is like mild to moderate type of hypertension, उसमें use करते हैं. The specific ones that you use are hydrochlorothiazide and indapamide. Okay, then we have loop diuretics. Loop diuretics will be furosemide and bumetanide. You'll also see torsemide being used quite a lot in some hospitals. Then we have potassium sparing diuretics. Potassium sparing diuretics will be spironolactone, then your amiloride and triamterene. Okay, so these are the diuretics that are used in hypertension. Then we have second class, that is drugs used or drugs acting on renin angiotensin aldosterone system. Now we've already discussed what is RAS in diuretics. Okay, I'll quickly brief you what is RAS. RAS is a system that is activated whenever blood pressure falls, or it can be because of several other stimuli as well. We'll not get into the details, but whenever RAS is stimulated, what ends up happening is blood pressure increases through various mechanisms. Now in RAS, the first class that will come is your second AC inhibitors. Okay, AC inhibitors we've discussed. So specifically, it is captopril, enalapril, and ramipril. Ramipril. These three are specifically very good in case of hypertension. Again, this is also mild to moderate type of hypertension. Now, there is another class called angiotensin 2 receptor antagonists or blockers. Okay, blockers. These are called ARBs. Okay, angiotensin 2 receptor blockers. Now we'll start discussing from this. The primary drug that will come under ARBs will be losartan, telmisartan, candesartan, and olmesartan. So as you can see in this, angiotensin 2 receptor blockers will end with sartans. Okay, so that is one way you can remember it. All AC inhibitors will end with prils. All ARBs will end with sartans. Okay, the primary advantage of giving ARBs over what do you call this thing, आपके AC inhibitors is that it will not affect bradykinin in any case. Okay, it will not cause dry cough, it will not cause angioedema, and it is generally well tolerated. Though this will also cause hypotension and hyperkalemia, just like AC inhibitors. Okay, one thing that you always have to remember is that never give AC inhibitors plus ARBs plus diuretics and NSAIDs. This combination is deadly. This combination is called triple whammy. Okay, AC inhibitors or ARBs. Okay, AC inhibitors or ARBs with diuretics and NSAIDs. This particular combination is called triple whammy. The reason is that whenever you combine these three drugs, there is significant amount of renal damage and it can significantly cause renal toxicity. Okay, so specifically avoid this. Whenever you are giving AC inhibitors or ARBs, do not combine them with NSAIDs, do not combine them with diuretics. If you are giving one of those, so let's suppose the patient is already on NSAIDs, give them either diuretics or give them either AC inhibitors or ARBs. Never combine them. Okay, it will lead to severe damage to your kidneys. So that is about AC your triple whammy. Now coming to mechanism of action of angiotensin 2 receptor blockers, show you one image so that it will be easier for you to understand. See, this is the tree of angiotensinogen. This is your one component of your RAS, right? Renin angiotensin aldosterone system. Now we already know that angiotensinogen, a protein in your blood, excuse me, gets converted through renin that is secreted from your kidneys into angiotensin 1. Now, angiotensin 1 gets converted into angiotensin 2 in your lungs, where AC inhibitors will play a role, captopril, lisinopril, all of those. Right? We already discussed about this. ARBs, angiotensin receptor blockers, will come here. They will not let angiotensin 2 stimulate AT1 receptor. Whenever this is occurring, let's suppose ARB is not present. Let's suppose this is not present. Okay, you are not giving the patient any drug. One second. Oh dear. Okay, let's suppose this is not present. What will end up happening is the patient will have vasoconstriction, sympathetic activation, cell proliferation, aldosterone release. Aldosterone release in turn causes sodium and water retention. Okay, this will also directly cause renal sodium resorption. So if you do not block the action of angiotensin 2 on AT1 receptors, it will cause all of these functions and ultimately blood pressure will increase. The purpose of giving angiotensin receptor blockers is they will competitively block the receptor. Okay, they will block AD2 receptors, and in the process, what they end up doing is that they will cause vasodilation, they will cause sympathetic inactivation, and they will stop the release of aldosterone. They will also stop sodium reabsorption, meaning sodium will get excreted out. All of this will cause hypotension, or it will decrease plasma volume, and ultimately it will cause decrease in blood pressure. That is the primary mechanism of angiotensin receptor blocker. Pretty simple. Okay, AC inhibitors are working in between angiotensin 1 and angiotensin 2. angiotensin receptor blockers are blocking the receptor on which angiotensin 2 works. Okay, angiotensin 2 has to go and function on certain receptors, right? On your blood vessels, on your sympathetic neurons, and things like that. So it is blocking all of that. It is causing vasodilation. Okay, if you are giving angiotensin 2 receptor blockers, let's suppose you give losartan, okay, to a patient. Losartan will tend to cause vasodilation. It will inactivate sympathetic pathway. It will stop the release of aldosterone, and it will cause sodium excretion rather than sodium resorption, because of which blood pressure will go down. That is the mechanism of action of ARB. Okay, I hope